Hello guys, welcome back. In our part 2 series of C2B transactions, we are going to have a look at how we are going to be able to simulate our C2B transactions. Now, before that, let us first of all finish up on this to-do item, whereby we're going to create our validation endpoint where the transaction results are going to be posted. Now, as you remember, we said that our validation URL is going to be /money then validation, right? So what we now need to do is create this particular validation endpoint, right? So let's proceed and do it. So a response entity, for now we're going to say acknowledge let's say response, acknowledge response, say validation. All right, just go validate transaction, call it like that. All right, so on our validate transaction, we expect that when the kind of results that are going to be posted here is going to look something like this. All right, it's going to look something like this, all right? So I'm going to copy that, then let's come back to our IDE. Let's create our PowerJo representation of the transaction response. All right, so this is going to be we can call it transaction result, right? Transaction results. Then of course Jackson transaction results, then generate. Okay, so I'm going to reload. So this is the transaction results. So as usual, we need to add, okay, not duplicated, so for that, so add data. Awesome. So with this, now we can proceed. We expect this is going to come from request body transaction results, import class transaction results. All right, so this is the endpoint that's going to be invoked. So we need to put a post mapping, then path, you say it's going to be validation, right? Then as usual, we need to produces application JSON. Okay, all right, now I'm going also to create this. Basically, this is a response that you're going to be giving back to Mpesa. So I'm going to create this as a Java class, acknowledge response. It's going just to be a simple object, so message that we want to pull to give to Safaricom. So at data, right? Now, since this is a PowerJo that you're going to be constantly using, I'm going to create a global instance of acknowledge response so that we can be able to inject it at any point that we want. So without further much ado, I'm going to come here and say public acknowledge response. All right, so let's say get the acknowledge response, get acknowledge response. Of course, we need to annotate this with bin, right? So acknowledge response is equals to new acknowledge response, then acknowledge response dot set the message, will this be success, right? Then we need to return the acknowledge response true. Now with this, now we can come to our controller. Let's just get it from here. Then let's say private final acknowledge response. So we need to do a construct injection, right? So now with that, we can just now come and for now we are not going to do a lot of logic. For now we're just going to return to Safaricom and just tell them, okay, we've received the transaction response, so acknowledge response, right? In our later episodes, we are going to have a look at how we will be able now to store the transaction details in a database. All right, so with that, so our validation is now done. Okay, just a simple validation URL. Now let us test if it is working, right? So I'm going to run the application. It's running on port 8080, so it's a /validation. So I'm going to initiate success. Okay, so it looks like it's working. Remember, this is just on localhost, so just to test that it is working as expected. So our validation URL is working correctly. Now we can now proceed and work on simulating our C2B transaction, right? Good. So to start, we're going to have a look at how a simulate C2B transaction request looks like. So for that, we're going to see that it looks something similar to this. This is a request. The response looks something like this. All right, let's see, something like that. Okay, so as usual, we're going to start to create a photo representation of our C2B request. Okay, so I'm going to copy the sample, then I'm going to generate a photo. Okay, so I'm going to say simulate C2B request. Simulate C2B request. This is Jackson. Right. So let's reload. As usual, we annotate with. We got that right. Right. Then we also need our Pojo representation of the response that we expect after we simulate a C2B transaction. So as usual, generate Pojo, then Jackson, then can I say simulate C2B response. Simulate C2B, not compare with, apologies for that. Simulate C2B response. Okay, we also annotate with that data. Cool. Now with this, we now need to go and do our implementation for our C2B transaction simulation. I'm going to close this. I'm also going to close this. Okay, so as usual, what we are going to do is we now need to create the method where we're going to simulate our C2B transaction. So we expect a simulate C2B response. So when we go to the, I can just do simulate, simulate C2B transaction, right? Where we expect a simulate C2B request, right? Alright, then with that, we now need to implement as usual. Let me first collapse this. It does not implement the method. We need to, okay, now with this, as usual, first step, we need to get the access token. Right, access token is equals to get access token. Alright, now we have that. We also need to do now our request body. Okay, request body, we can call it request. Let's just call it body. Okay, body equals to request body dot create. Of course, so create JSON media type. So as show our helper utility, we need to convert our object. So the object that in this case that is going to be converted is going to be that. Okay. Yeah, okay, let's replace final null. Okay, with that now we can proceed now to create our request, right? So request, this is going to be request is equals to new request dot builder, right? So the URL, so this is a URL that we expect that we'll use for simulating a C2B transaction. So let's have a look at how it looks like, our simulation. Let's get it. Looks something like this. 1 second. Our simulate it is. Okay. So as usual, we're going to add it to our configuration file. So we're going to say simulate transaction endpoint, right? So it looks like that. This is our simulate transaction endpoint, and as usual we need to add this to our Mpesa configuration, file. So private string, so simulate transaction endpoint. Cool. Now with that we can now come here and say we expect it to come from Mpesa configuration, then get simulate transaction endpoint. Hope up to there it makes sense, and we are together on that. Then once we have that, we can definitely post. We need to post our body. So with that we also need to add a header. So in this case, actually we have this constant in our constant file that is called authorization header string. So to make things simple and also our code to be much cleaner and maintainable, I'm also going to replace here for our register URL to use the authorization header string, right? So authorization, we need something like this, bearer, of course we need a space there. Then it's supposed to be access token dot get access token, right? Then we can build. Okay, so as you can see, we are repeating this bearer token the same as here, right? So to make our code cleaner, we can also come here and just do this public static final string bearer string, then you can call it bearer. To make this clean, I'm going to bring it there. So this is what we need. Alright, so it's supposed to be bearer. So ideally it's supposed to be something like this, but we're not going. I'm just going to format like that. We need a space there. So I'm going to come and get this and also replace it on our register URL so that it can be much more easier to maintain code, right? Code so far that is okay. So now the other thing that we need to do, yeah, we can also assert that our body is not null. I'm just going to get that piece of code, but before that we now need to do our response. So response is equals to what? We call it HTTP client. We perform a new call, then the request, we to catch this exception. As usual, I'm going to return null if there's an exception. So then we can say simple log, simple not simulate, not simulate C2B transaction. We can just print that error that we're getting. Simplicity, going to use that. So we have our response. This now our set is going to go to none. Then as usual, we use Jackson to convert the response to as the expected class. So object mapper dot read value. So with our read value is going to be response dot body dot string. We need to cast it to our C2B, simulate C2B response, right? Cool. Right, seems like we're pretty much done. All right, so we can this one we can just put it as an inline variable, right? Yeah, like that. So with that, I think we should be good to go. So remember, before we proceed to invoke this, make sure that you have wired up your ngrok, you've done the configuration as required. If you haven't done so, kindly watch episode 2 of this series so that you can see how to set it up. All right, cool. So now let us now come to our controller. Can I remove this? Now we expect that in our controller, this is where now we should be able now to invoke maybe our simulate transaction. So I'm going to come response entity. I'm going to return the result that we're going to get from Safaricom, right? Then I can just call it simulate. You can call it simulate C2B, simulate C2B transaction. Yeah, that's descriptive enough. So we need to post a request body of a simulate C2B request, right? Alright, so we want it to be like these, simulate C2B at post mapping. Of course, path should be something like that. And is a norm produces. You got that right. Pretty basic. Alright, so with that, so far so good. Now we can proceed and now invoke our Daraja implementation. So response entity, you can just for now return an okay. So Daraja API simulate C2B transaction, right? Simulate C2B transaction. Okay, and I think now with this we should be done. So moment of truth, I'm going to rerun this. So to double check things are working as expected, I'm going to initiate another register URL request. This success. All right, then so the register URL is working as expected. So now moment of truth. So now we expect that when we hit the simulate C2B endpoint, we expect that a request is going to be sent to Mpesa, and we expect that on this URL that we configured as our validation, we expect results to be posted basically on this endpoint, right? Good. Now let us initiate. So awesome. Now that we have initiated the C2B transaction, let us have a look if the response have been posted to our callback URL. All right, so here we go. cool. This should be it. Reference H22. We can just initiate another C2B transaction and see. Let's say H3, this is a random number. Initiate. Service request successful. Let's see if another callback is going to come. There you go. Here, so as you can see, our callbacks are now working as expected. So that will be it for this episode, guys. See you on the next one, and as always, make sure to subscribe and to turn on the notifications bell. Goodbye.